Hi everyone. I'm going to be doing something a little different with this video. Instead of taking a ship and going over what all the vehicles are that I can fit inside of it, I'm going to take a vehicle, which in this case is going to be the R.O.C, and see how many ships I can fit it inside of. One of the things about the R.O.C that I really like is that it's the first vehicle that you can get directly into from the front. This has made parking it in tight and enclosed spaces a lot easier of an experience than what I've had with using any other vehicle. And the adjectives tight and enclosed pretty much describes the inside of almost every ship. And I think that this is a good time to reiterate my usual disclaimer that I give at the start of every one of these videos, and it's that I'm not trying to cram as many R.O.Cs inside of something that I possibly can. I'm trying to show you how many R.O.Cs can be safely transported by a particular vessel. And when I say safely transported, I mean that after they've been parked, you're going to be able to get easily out of the R.O.C and into the ship that's transporting it, and that you're going to be able to get all of the vehicles that you're carrying back out of the ship again in one piece. Any knucklehead can just keep ramming more vehicles into a confined space, especially if you don't have any regard for their well-being. But I'm more concerned with talking about how many R.O.Cs you'd realistically be able to use a ship to carry if you were actually playing the game as intended. So with that said, let's take a look at the Starfarer. The Starfarer still has the best track record for carrying the most vehicles at one time when it comes to flyable ships. And this remains true when it comes to carrying around a bunch of R.O.Cs. I found that the Starfarer can easily hold 9 of them at once, and I did not have a difficult time at all getting these in. As you can see, there's plenty of room to walk around them, and you still have full access to the ship's interior and the ramp that leads to the outside of the Starfarer. If you wanted to transport more than this, you might be able to manage to get another 1 or 2 in, but at that point you'd just be hogpiling them. So 9 is the recommended limit that I'd give. And any more than that and you're most likely going to start having issues trying to get them back out of the ship again in one piece. As far as atmospheric handling goes, in my opinion, the Starfarer is one of the worst dropship options to go with. But as far as raw carrying capacity goes, it's going to be the best choice out of all the ships that I'm going to be talking about. The Carrack is surprisingly good at acting as a dropship for a bunch of R.O.Cs. In total, I've gotten 6 of them inside of a Carrack's vehicle bay at one time. The secret to parking R.O.Cs in the Carrack is to leave enough space between the rows so you can still walk in between them. The Carrack's ramp provides an easy way to load and deploy R.O.Cs from. The ship cuts through the atmosphere even when it's going at slow speeds, and the lower deck provides a good vantage point to see the surface of a planet from. Another plus for the Carrack is its med bay. The R.O.Cs don't have shields, and their chassis seem to be made of tissue paper, so having that med bay to spawn back at comes in handy. A lot. The only downside is that the Carrack's a big ship and it doesn't fit just anywhere that you want to land it. This is especially true when you're trying to position a ramp so that it lies flush with the ground. So far, this has been my preferred go-to ship when it comes to using something to provide overwatch for a group of R.O.Cs. It can hover for a long period of time and handles even the toughest atmospheric conditions like a champ. I can run back and forth between the vehicles pretty fast, and I often don't even have to bother to land when picking up a R.O.C. Instead, I just pitch down the front of the ship so that the ramp just barely touches the ground, and then have the R.O.C drive back up into the vehicle bay. Also, if you have a couple of gunners with you, then the Carrack can provide cover fire using its more than above average sized turrets. I managed to get 4 R.O.Cs into the Val, and safe or unsafe, this is the most you're going to be able to get into it at one time. There's not a lot of wiggle room as far as that goes. I just recommend that you make sure to hug the left and right sides of the vehicle bay when you're parking so that you can make an opening that's wide enough for you to walk down the center of the 2 rows of vehicles. That way you'll have enough room to enter the Val's habitation section or be able to use the ramp to get out of the ship. The Val's intended purpose is to be a dropship, and its 4 VTOL thrusters are going to allow it to hold steady during the worst weather conditions that any planet has to offer. I think that it could synergize nicely with the R.O.C, especially if you're transporting a group of them. The Valve is just small enough so that it can make fast trips down to a planet's atmosphere without burning too much fuel in the process, and it can be used to quickly pick up a vehicle and take it to the next mineable rock to harvest. This way you could easily manage up to 4 GCRs at once, which would maximize their speed and earning potential while providing a place for them to drop their goods off. That way you could empty their inventory and get back out there and keep mining. The Valve is designed to be very effective at attacking ground targets, which makes it the perfect escort for protecting a rock. And it can hover in place for long periods of time, if not indefinitely. It's also the only dedicated dropship that has amenities like a bathroom, shower, and a modest-sized galley, so it could be used as a rest stop for drivers to take care of any of their players' arising needs. So far, out of all these ships, the Val gets my highest recommendation to use as a transport for a R.O.C. The only downside to this ship is that until blades become a thing, the Valkyrie is going to need a lot of extra crewmen to man all those guns, and adding 4 to 6 additional people to your overhead costs is a lot for the amount of DPS that they provide. But realistically speaking, you could get away with just having the bottom turret and the pilot control guns for protection, so it's not really that big a deal. The Caterpillar can also be used to transport GCRs, and I was happy to be able to verify that you can fit a rock into each one of the side bays. Actually, it wasn't that surprising since I already knew that you could park an Ursa rover into them. The only annoying thing about this for the time being is if you want to load a rock into the Caterpillar, then you have to tilt the ship on its side, which turns the cargo doors into ramps, and then you can use them to drive a vehicle right up into the cargo bay. I had to fly around for a while before I found a hill that I could use that was flat enough on one side to make this happen. And of course I had to wait for the rocks that were all chasing around after me to catch up and get to that same hill. Having to do this every time that you want to load the ship up is more than just an inconvenience, it's a straight up pain. So the total for Caterpillars is 4 rocks, which isn't bad. The Caterpillar may look like a giant domino, but it handles well enough while flying around planetside. And if any of the drivers needs to take a break, then they can use the ship's restroom or galley, which nauseatingly are located in the same room. The Caterpillar, just like the Carrack, the Valkyrie, the Connies, and the Starfarer, all make great bases to operate out of. They can provide all the amenities that a driver could ask for, be a place to drop off your excess cargo, and act as a spot to store your vehicles at and log out of the game from. The Cutlass Black never ceases to impress with its versatility, and I felt that all over again when I used it as a transport for the rock. The recommended amount that it can carry at one time is 2. And I parked them like this so that one was positioned in front of the other, and if you do the same, you'll be able to get out of both of them and still have a clear path to get to the flight deck. After this, I took a look around and decided that I wanted to push it a bit more by trying to get one more rock inside, but in order to do so I had to rearrange things. So I parked the first rock as far to the right and to the back of the cargo bay as I could get it. Then I parked the second one as far off to the left as it would go. After that, I took the last one and drove it in going forward till I cleared the back of the ramp. This method is a lot more sloppy of a process and it's going to make getting into the flight deck difficult to say the least. But if you have a dedicated pilot and the other 3 drivers don't mind sitting in the rock for the rest of the trip, then this could be a good alternative option for you. So the Cutty stands at a carrying capacity of 2 recommended and 3 total rocks, but carrying 3 comes with some caveats attached to it. Now, speaking of Cutties, you can get a rock inside of both the Cutlass Red and the Cutlass Blue, but here's the best thing about synergizing the rock with either one of those 2 vessels. And it's if you pull straight in, you can walk out of the front of the rock and right into the ship. This is important because you can't do this if you're carrying something like a Cyclone, which will fit in that rear cargo area, but the fit is so tight that the driver is going to have to sit in the vehicle while it's being transported. While the unique design of the rock bypasses this limitation, which means that you can carry a rock in a blue or a red while flying solo. I honestly think that the Cutlass Red is a good match for the rock because of the medbay. The medbay allows this ship to synergize with a lot of things that you wouldn't normally think go together. Well, I'm a little harder pressed to think of a way that the blue and the rock synergize together, other than it's nice to have the option, especially if it's the only ship that you can use to transport it with. There's kind of a common theme when it comes to using the standard Freelancer, the Dur, or the Misk as a vehicle transport. And it was the same issue that I was having when using it to haul a Cyclone, which is you can technically get one inside. You can also technically get a rock inside as well, but neither one of these vehicles are designed to or supposed to fit within a Freelancer. And in order to get either one of them into the cargo bay, you have to use one of the ramp's hydraulic pistons to slip one of the vehicle's tires inside of it, and then worm the rest of the vehicle's chassis in after that. Now, I've had varied degrees of success at doing this, and also in getting it out again. The chances of getting a vehicle fatally stuck when performing either of these 2 actions can be pretty high, especially if you're not used to doing it. Now, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be getting plenty of comments from people telling me how they've never had a problem using the Freelancer to transport a rock, but I still wouldn't recommend it. Now, the Freelancer Max is a completely different story. Its cargo bay is quite literally the size of 2 standard Freelancers that have been welded together, and the back ramp is so wide that you could easily drive the rock right into the cargo bay. I've tried parking the GCRs in a number of different ways, but no matter how I tried to configure them, the most I could get inside at one time was always 3. And if you park them this way, you'll be able to easily get around each of the vehicles, be able to get inside of the ship, and be able to exit out of the Max using the ramp. You could manage to get 4 or even more rocks in there, but you'd really just be jamming them in, and it would be in such a haphazard way that you most likely wouldn't be able to get them out again. The Constellation series, including everything but the Phoenix and the Taurus, can carry a grand total of only one rock at a time. Now, I like how the Archimedes of the Merlin can act as a scout and provide overwatch for the rock while it does its thing, but I do see a couple of issues with using the Constellation as a dropship. For starters, it's a lot of ship to use for transporting a single rock, especially considering that you could use something that's a lot more cost-effective like a Cutlass Black or a Valkyrie. And second is that even though it has VTOL engines, the Connie still has a tendency to move rather sluggishly through an atmosphere, and it can be a bit awkward to land in a lot of places, especially if you're trying to touch down on terrain that's not particularly flat, which most terrain tends not to be. The Connie also uses the same grid to store cargo on that it uses to transport a vehicle, so it's going to have to be a trade-off between holding one vehicle or having cargo space. A friend of mine has an interesting workaround for this limitation that I hadn't considered. He was planning on taking a rock with him while going on a trading run. He'd then drop it off before they reached their destination, land at an outpost, purchase his cargo, and wait for it to be loaded. When they were done, he'd go pick up the driver, and after emptying the rock of all its goods, he'd just abandon it and claim insurance on it once they reached their next destination. This plan seemed to be a bit wasteful at first, but as long as you don't bother to customize the rock, then you're not going to lose anything by claiming insurance on it. And it can allow you to earn even more UEC per trading run by having one of your crew who would otherwise just be standing around spending their time doing some light mining and earning you some extra cash. The Phoenix's cargo space is built differently than the other Connies. Its cargo ramp is wider and shallower than theirs are, so you can park 2 rocks onto the Phoenix's cargo ramp. I found the Phoenix to be an interesting choice to use as a mobile base, mainly because you can use it to manage 2 rocks instead of just 1. Plus the additional amenities, the better view, additional sleeping quarters, and upgraded defenses make it the best Constellation variant to use as a base to operate out of. Plus, who's ever in charge of the group can oversee the entire operation while they're kicking back in a hot tub. I found that the 600i and the Hammerhead both have a very similar issue when it came to transporting a rock, and is that both of these ships have open space that extends out and around the cargo lift. Now, I had plans on parking as many rocks as I could along the edges of that area and really packing them in. If you look at the 600i's cargo deck with nothing else in there for scale, it looks like you could use this space as a bona fide parking garage, but the amount of space that's actually there is deceptively smaller than it seems. You can try to jam a vehicle into that space, but I encountered a lot of issues when trying. Your results may vary, but after all is said and done, I still would only recommend using the 600i to carry 1 rock at a time. Even the cargo ramp looks a lot bigger than it really is. I was convinced that you could get more than 1 GCR onto it, but in reality it's just big enough to get one on comfortably with some room to spare. I'm fairly certain there's plenty of screenshots where people had sloppily parked more than 1 onto the ramp at a time, but when it comes to reeling it in, you're going to find that rocks don't play well together, especially when they're packed in together that closely. And if they're anywhere near one another when the ramp starts moving, it'll cause a lot of collision issues. And remember, the rock doesn't have any shields, and it detonates quite easily if you start knocking them around. Using the Hammerhead as a transport for the rocket almost slipped my mind at first, but it's not too outlandish of an idea. Mainly I was thinking that the Hammerhead is an excellent escort ship that can follow ships all the way down through an atmosphere, and although it doesn't handle nearly as good as it used to, it can still hold its own while flying planetside. While the other ships you're escorting are spending their time loading up on cargo, you can have a crewman go out and do some light mining while you wait. I only had one issue with using the Hammerhead to transport a rock, and the issue was that I was trying to store a few more of them inside of the Hammerhead by parking in the area that surrounded the ramp, much like what I was trying to do with the 600i. But that space inside the Hammerhead's a lot smaller than it looks. In fact, it's a lot smaller than the space in the 600i, so I had no luck getting that done. The final verdict is you're going to be stuck with only being able to transport 1 rock while using the Hammerhead. You may be able to park something smaller like a gravlev in that peripheral area that surrounds the ramp, but you're definitely not going to be able to get anything like a rock in there. The Reclaimer is pretty much the same story as the Hammerhead and the 600i. The only difference is that the Reclaimer's ramp is only open on 2 sides, so you're going to have to do some parallel parking to get a rock properly onto the ramp, making it the most inconvenient ramp to work with out of all of them, but you can still do it. I can't really see the Reclaimer as having any kind of synergy with a rock, and I can think of so many better choices to use as a dropship for it. Plus the ramp seems to go out of its way to not be vehicle friendly, but the choice is still there if you want to exercise it. Just for fun, I tried a few unconventional ways to transport a rock, like having it ride piggyback on a Sabre. Now, this was a silly experiment, but I did discover something very interesting from trying it. I've attempted doing things like this in the past, but now weight distribution is a very real thing. I had the rock offset on the back of the Sabre and it was causing the ship to unevenly tilt to the side that was carrying more weight. And before you say that it always did this, no it did not. This is actually quite new and it has some very interesting ramifications for future gameplay. This demonstrates how an uneven distribution of cargo or losing an engine or wing is going to greatly affect how a ship flies, which is going to be pushed even further in future builds. And I did try to see how many rocks I could get inside of an 890 jump, but unfortunately due to some technical issues, I couldn't get an accurate count. Basically, they kept falling through the ramp every time I tried to retract it back into the ship. But I previously did a similar experiment with the Ursa rover, and although this footage only shows 6 rovers in the picture, you can get 1 more onto the ramp for a total of 7. Considering that I can get 4 rocks into the Val and only 1 rover, that means you could probably get a crazy amount of rocks into the jump. But I'm not going to be able to verify just how many until after they stabilize the collision issues that they were having with the ramp. Well, that's going to be it for this video about the Grey Cat Rock. I'd like to thank my patrons for their support, because without their help, I wouldn't be able to afford to keep putting the time and effort that I do into making these videos. If you'd like to become a patron, then you'll be able to find a link to my Patreon channel in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and take care.